It's so convenient when the scripture kind of follows along, week to week with what was happening last week, for instance. And so this is a sermon, but it is actually a continuation of the interview last week. And let me begin by saying I spoke about a book called Heaven and Hell. So I ordered some for our library. And there's one in the office if anybody would like to take that. And then when they're done, bring it back. This is what it looks like. So it's substantial. There's a lot to describe in Heaven and Hell. And you might be surprised at what you read. So the second part of following up on last week is that John Nightingale asked me a question. He said, "Why did you decide to become a minister?" And I started to answer that question by saying, something about the process that I went through, what my journey was like. And because that is part of the answer, but I ended up covering a lot of ground without really directly answering that question. And I had to go back to the video to kind of confirm that I heard what I heard. And Lorraine, she's so, she's on it. And she said it after the church service, she said, "Well, I'd still like to hear you answer that question." And so here we go. I'm going to answer that question. My first reasons for considering the ministry were related to the question that I've told you about that I received from the deacon at St. Gabriel's Episcopal Church in Florida, a man named Jack Horton. And he asked me at a Christmas party, "What does it mean to you when I say to you that God loves you?" So that question is a question that's sort of like a window that opened up on the idea that love was something more than just the affection between a boy and a girl, especially a boy who understood love to be something that was really infatuation, wasn't really the kind of mature love that we talk about or what we know about, right? We don't get caught misunderstanding what love is too often. But anyhow, the first experiences I had of love were things that I didn't really identify as love. When you get that care from your parents, sometimes it's overwhelming or controlling, or it just feels like it's limiting and it has all these boundaries on it. And to think that that might be a way of expressing love is kind of hard for a young person to get a handle on. And then there's your friends, and of course for young boys, 10 years old, or as they grow up and go along, you're loyal to your friends, and you meet your friends, and you go to their door at their house, and you ask their parents, "Can Gary come out and play?" That kind of thing. But you don't call that love. That's not something that boys would necessarily think of as love at that age. And so you kind of get, well, I should say that I got surprised by my first bouts of infatuation with the opposite sex. And but what I found with that question by Mr. Horton was that I wanted to walk through that door that was opened. The idea that love was something other than all of those infatuations or things that were going on around me, the fact that there was a mystery there just kind of captured me in a certain kind of way. And like I said to you before, when I heard that question, I didn't know the answer to that question, but I felt like my life would never be the same again, that it sent me on a certain kind of journey. Well, I'm not going to take you through the whole evolution of my understanding of love, but I do have a few things that I can say about it. Where I ended up is that love is the reason for our existence and all of creation. Love is the energy and life found in every particle of the universe. It's a big statement, two big statements. There's a lot of complexity to it, but I think all of you kind of understand it in an intuitive way. So that idea that love was something sort of cosmic like that is what sort of propelled me on that journey. But love isn't just the source of creation. I discovered that love is also the key to understanding every relationship that exists. Our relationship to the world, our relationship to our friends, our relationship to our families, our relationship to our lovers, all the way to that other end of the spectrum on one side that says love of God and love of neighbor, but then way over on the other side too, somehow to find a way to love our enemies. So it's kind of like an axis around which everything else turns in the universe. Now, I do believe that a person can enter any profession, do any kind of work, live just about any kind of life, not every kind, but many, and do all those things. Like me, I wanted to be a horticulturalist at one time. At one time, I was a salesman, a business manager, even a CEO of a company. Can live out that love and do the things that I mentioned. However, even though I'm sure many people can live all of those kinds of lives and understand everything that I just said about love, I couldn't. Or at least I should say, I got to a point where I couldn't anymore. And that's when I realized that I was being invited to be different, that I was invited by my experiences to listen to a different kind of voice inside of me. And I decided to accept that invitation without knowing what it meant. And I felt called by that first question in such a way that it sort of led me on a journey of discovery, but that's kind of what a spiritual journey is. It's living a life of discovery, having a certain kind of curiosity. So as I said, my first reason for thinking about being a minister was that question and kind of going through that open door. It was about what I wanted to learn. And part of that understanding comes about in some of the ways that we're reading about in Exodus right now. There's another part earlier in Exodus when Moses asked God to say who sent him to Pharaoh. And he says, "Tell them I am sent you." And I've told you many times how the Hebrew verb to be is without a tense, meaning that it can be present tense, past tense, future tense. The context is always what tells you what's being referred to. And I think that way of seeing God is part of that invitation, because what it's saying is that we're going to encounter the way God was. We're going to encounter God the way God is. We're going to encounter God in ways that we can't predict the way God will be. So really, you can't know what it means to answer that call to go through a door of love into the world. So, I wanted to say yes to love. I wanted to say yes to the invitation I was given, even though I didn't understand what it meant. all the while knowing that I could not answer that question for a single other human being. And that's part of the tension that exists sometimes with part of our spiritual journey, that there's things that we think we teach to each other or that can be taught, but really the only thing that we can do is kind of prepare the ground around something so that a person that comes and scatters some seeds or it's planted in that ground kind of figures out a way to grow on their own. So I've said, and you rightfully understand, that I'm here as a pastor in a Christian church because I believe that that the love of God, or that love that I'm talking about, has been revealed to me in multiple ways through Jesus Christ. That's why I'm a Christian pastor in a Christian church, even though that church has turned out to be so imperfect in the world. It is so filled with difficulties, but I think that we're called to look past that we're called not to deny it, not to try to understand, but to look past those difficulties and to continue on that journey for what it is. So the other thing that I hope that you've been hearing from me about love in my sermons is that there's a freedom that is a component of love, meaning that if you're not completely free, you can't really love something. We can't be compelled to love another person. It has to be something that comes up from inside of us. So that's a very short summary of the complexity of love, the meaning of love, and sort of why that led me into the ministry. I found out some interesting things. You know, as a man, I always had this orientation toward bring me a problem, I'll fix it, you know. But I learned along the way that sometimes you just have to be present. Sometimes you just have to listen. Sometimes that the best way to be helpful is to not do anything, but to be a companion with the person that you're with by giving them your time and attention. And that was a hard thing for me to learn. I'm better at it, but I still have my moments where I want to fix things. And so it's not easy. It's not easy. I would have to say it's a lot harder being a pastor than I thought it would be. But that doesn't mean I don't like it or that I wasn't up to the challenge. I feel like I am up to the challenge. But let me put what I have said so far in the context of Ladera Community Church. Okay? What that means is that no matter what we choose to do, whether it's build a cottage, lease space to a preschool, build affordable housing, have a brass band concert on a weekend near the 4th of July, it doesn't matter what we choose to do. And I might talk about a lot of different things like having a good process or being transparent or being inclusive and open. But underneath all of those things, I can tell you that I am always looking for the component of love that exists in that effort, in that communication, in that process, whatever it is for us. I'll search for love in the way that every person speaks to another person, regardless of what they're saying. There's an awareness that I'm speaking about that I'm not always great at, but once you make the kind of commitment that I made by sort of walking through that door and answering yes to love, I think that you never lose a feeling of that being present for you. And I have never lost a feeling of that being present for me. But I also realized that this is not something that is that common. As much as we talk about it, as much as we see it here in this community and in little moments of light and understanding, I realized that when I answered that call, that I would be set apart. It's a little bit like the reading today. To hear God to say to be priestly and holy, and then to hear the people of Israel answer the way they answered, and I put it in context for me, everything that the Lord has spoken to me, I will do. If you do that, you will be set apart. I challenge you to live one day believing that every act that you take, every word that you speak, every thought that you have comes from love. It's representing love in some way inside of your being. We have awareness of it at moments, and then we go through long periods where we don't. To live with love that close to the surface of everything you do is radically changing to a person's life. If you open a bank account with love, that bank account is going to be different than a bank account opened without love. If you buy a car with the thought of love in what you're doing, it's going to be driven differently than if you don't think about love. And that's what being set apart and being holy is. You can't do those things and be normal. If you ever thought that you didn't want to be normal, this is the best way to be weird. This is the best way to be a stranger in a strange land. This is the best way to be a spiritual being having a material experience. But there's a problem with accepting that holiness, that being set apart. And it's what I talked about just a little bit earlier in my sermon. Just like me, and just like the Israelites, you can answer that question that says, I am going to do whatever God speaks to me, but you don't know what that is. You have to go into it knowing that you will be continually surprised, continually off balance, continually challenged by the world around you. When we think of holy, we think of sacred, okay? And there is a sacred component of our understanding of holy, but what it really means is to be set apart. So we're being asked to be set apart. Now, some of the other difficulties that go along with that, at least for me as your pastor, is that, to say that I don't always feel holy is kind of the least of it. There's lots of potential difficulties like being watched by people waiting for you to fail. Or there's people that expect you to succeed, and then if you don't succeed, what does that mean? Does that mean you're not holy? Does that mean somehow you don't understand what you're doing? Which I'll just say right now, I don't always understand what I'm doing. Sometimes I do things from an intuitive place that it's as much a mystery to me as the people around me. And I know that I am probably never going to live up to the standard of holiness that some people have. And I know that for some people, I might nail it here and there, but most of the time, I'm going to fall somewhere in between. It's going to be partially successful, partially a mess, partly hard to understand, and that's where I fall back on what I said a moment ago. It's a big thing just to be present. To be in those moments when things are not working and not run and hide. And that, in a way, is the way the world is too, right? In those really tough moments, if you can sort of hold your space, spread out your arms, embrace whatever is happening to you, then you learn to accept the consequences of love. And there's a lot of good things that we can experience with love. And you know them. You've experienced them. I know from talking to every single one of you in this church that you have those experiences and you feel them. And when we go out with that idea of love in our awareness, when we are kind of moving in that intuitive space where we are aware of our feelings and our emotions, we meet God. And that's that other part of the relationship about, or the part about love that is about relationship. Meaning that you can't, in my opinion, you can't do anything in this world without meeting God, whether it's in another person, whether it's in the objects that you work with, whether it's in the science that you attempt to examine or investigate, in your theology, in your family relationships, in your partner's relationship with you. When you work from the perspective of love, you can't help but meet God. So one thing I'd like to say to you that you may not be feeling right now is that I believe that because you are here right now, you have said yes to love. If you go to church with any kind of awareness, any kind of spiritual event, any kind of understanding of the depth of a relationship, you are saying yes to love. Now, how far you want to take that, how deep you want to go, or how high you want to go with that understanding of love, well, that's up to your effort. It's up to your intention, your will. It's up to a lot of things within you that you call on to bring you face to face with love and ultimately face to face with God. Because I've said that doesn't mean that you're going to find holiness here. I remember hearing someone say one time, the best way to make sure Jesus is in church is to bring him with you. Because if you depend on him being there without you bringing him along, you might be disappointed. But that's just being human. That's not a critique so much as it is just an understanding of the way the world is, the way things are. Maybe you can find some wholeness here. I like to think of wholeness sometimes instead of holiness, because being set apart is one thing, but finding wholeness as a human being is something different. I always appreciated Kyle when he said he comes to church to be a whole person. And that's something that I think all of us aspire to. But also, sometimes when we come here, we're just going to find a bunch of other people that are struggling on the same journey. And we find ourselves in the middle of the struggle instead of rising above that and being aware of all the ways that love functions in our lives. So, why am I a minister? Well, I answered yes to that open door. I answered yes to love without knowing what that meant. And along the way, I found out a few things that just sort of kept me on that same journey. But I think the bottom line for why I am a minister and why I am here or any place that I choose to go is that I want to be in the mix of that process of love, wherever it is, and to facilitate an awareness of that love in everything we choose to do as a community. And even though I don't know all the ways that will go or don't have all the answers for how that will work for each person, I choose to make that effort with you. You called me, I answered the call. Whether you knew it or not, it was all about love. Finding a way for you to figure out how to love me, and for me to figure out a way to love all of you. I think we're doing pretty good. It's not always easy. Not always the same. But I think it's working pretty good. So, it's a journey. And I think it's best when it's a journey shared with people that give you an opportunity to love. And that's why I became a minister.